Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sharia Way Book Club container. This container takes place every Saturday at 11 a.m. Louisiana time. And within each of these containers, we take the time to discuss, delineate, disagree, and elevate some points that came up for us from reading the chapter at hand. For this book club, we are focusing on Hazrat Khan's mysticism of sound and music. And for the purpose of this container, we'll be focusing on chapter 12. So the read aloud happens. Hold on, not me having to check the calendar. I always have to do this. Let's see. Like I know when it's supposed to happen, but the day of the week. Anyways, so the read aloud of the chapter that we'll be discussing within book club happens and takes place every Wednesday at 2:30, I believe, Louisiana time, usually. And the book club again happens on Saturdays at 11 a.m. So feel free to pull up the invite to join the Broom Discord server. Should be in the episode details of this episode. And yeah, thank you again for listening, tuning in, and following us as we discuss this really riveting book. So chapter 12 we read is titled The Science and Art of Hindu Music. And I just want to hold space for those who are here live to share any points of reflection, any paragraphs that stood out to you, or any points that were made in the text that you want to elevate so that we can discuss it today. I guess for me, I'll start us off and speak to in chapter 12. I'll start with the first paragraph. I think this is the part in the text where Hazrat Khan speaks to science or music as a science, as according to the Eastern traditions, specifically the Sanskrit and Vedic traditions and Hindu traditions. And he goes on to say in the third paragraph that the source of both science and art is intuition, which I found really difficult to disagree with because as somebody who enjoys both science and music, I do feel like there is a spirit behind each of those schools of thought or pathways of study. And in the last book club, that is one thing we were kind of talking about, was like the spirit behind music or any given song at any given moment. But I also really enjoy and am grateful for the fact that science is being brought into this conversation as an artifact of human intuition. And I actually agree with that. For me personally, I feel like science is another art form to understand the world. And I do think that there is a spirit behind science as well. And I know that's probably like hard to hear, or maybe like even hard just for me to say, because especially in current time, there's a lot of compartmentalization where people are like spiritual sciences or spirit work exist on one plane of existence or in one category, and science is in another category, and those two worlds do not mingle, they do not meet, and they actually have no relation, is what I feel like is the dominant thought process for many people. And for me, I would actually say, like, if you go back to when science, I think we actually talked about this too in one of the Sharia Way book clubs, or no, the pre-games, was like how science's origins rest in the art of alchemy and like the blending of different elements and blending of different materia to create an outcome, a material outcome. And for me, like the style of experimenting and theorizing, um, I don't think is that rests in a lot of schools of thought when it comes to science. I don't think it's that different or that far off from intuitive deduction, which is really, really alive in spiritual sciences as well. There's also points in history. I can't remember what lineages these come from because I feel like they're the roots of them are in a lot of like indigenous cultures, is the idea of like shamans and priests also being alchemists and scientists and the great thinkers of their time. Not only just like um philosophy, but I actually do think that the roots of a lot of the thought processes that are born out of scientific experimenting have their roots in shamanism, have their roots in communal research, and have their roots in, I think, um, this intuitive relationship with the elements at large. Um, Not quite, Anna. Anna says re-indigenize science is what I'm hearing. I'm saying that science is indigenous. So re-indigenizing it would only be re-indigenizing it for people who have like forgotten that its roots come from this like interrelation between the earth and its people. And what I'm saying is that that connection has always been there. So I feel like I put a lot down. I'm also going to take a sip of some water, but I would love to hear what comes up for y'all, even in disagreement.
I pretty much agree. I think that like science and like if you think about the scientific method, like the way we learn it in school, they start with the hypothesis and like
Mm.
you like that's involving like you observing something and then you get like an idea like what if I wonder how this is related, and like the thing that sparks that idea is like an intuitive feeling. And I think like a lot of the indigenous things that people know and like have codified into mythologies or cosmologies or stuff like it's later getting proven by the more rigid forms of science that are out now, because they're like, but like even those people, the people who like test those theories and come up with the same answers, they probably had like an intuitive feeling like, this is probably related in this way, even though all the other science that's been out says it's not related. But I'm gonna go ahead and try it out. And like that, like it just all boils back down to like being curious about looking like what's really going on out here on this planet that we're on.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Tiff. And maybe that actually helps me like refine my point because I feel like maybe what I was doing was like throwing everything together. But I actually like what you said, how like the bare bones of the thinking process that are like applied to sciences now, like the hypothesis, the theory, like these things may have had intuitive roots. Um, and that like yeah, like in current time they might look different because it's like people in lab coats, people who are like sponsored probably by big universities, you know what I mean? But yeah, like I feel like it's important to name that like the roots of thinking and the way that like science helps you see the world is not attributed to me directly to like scientific lineages. um so yeah, I'm really glad that you said that. Thanks, Tiff. I'm also going to read, or I wonder if anyone who typed some stuff in the chat would like to unmute and read it out loud.
Um, yeah, I guess I'm just like going off in text a little bit. I wouldn't want anyone to have to read what I'm writing. But I guess like in summary, I was kind of saying how I get why like re-indigenizing science might come up just because of like the egregorical like accumulation around the term science and around the term like indigenization or indigeneity, right? It's like egregorically, like you were saying, it's like science kind of like I think when you say science to most people, they're gonna expect like a disinfected lab with like lab coats and like pure logic,
Right.
uh, using a logos which somehow delocalizes perception, even though
Mhm.
perception is the root of like all phenomenological experience, right? But I think it forgets that, you know, what we call science nowadays used to be called natural philosophy, I believe, in like Western Europe,
Mhm.
around like the time when money was created, around the time when like markets were developing, and also around the time when like maritime exploration by Europeans in a European mode of exploration and trade, which I'll say is quite exploitative as history looks upon it. Um, yeah, like it was called natural philosophy back then, and a lot of what we know as science today came from people with light skins in Western Europe having like mystical experiences.
Mhm.
So there's like quite some distance between that and what we call science now, which I would say it's like it kind of takes credit for all of their discoveries, like those people were the original scientists.
Right.
But then if you look at the way science is practiced now, it's vastly different to how they were practicing it, and you know, highly distorted by capitalism. And hmm, yeah, I'd say like it's biased towards knowledge, which can be used uh, martially,
Mhm.
militarily, biochemical weapons. Uh, I'm going to say biochemical weapons and then remedies for biochemical weapons. And I just like try to follow your example by cutting the discussion short there on that one. And then like when I talk about like the indigenous like egregores, I feel like when people think about indigenous people, they're like, okay, like so they're going to be like not that pale skinned. And
Right.
you know, there's a whole conversation that we've been having for like years in the broom now
Mhm.
around how whiteness robs people of indigeneity.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's like the egregore is basically like maybe you have like a non-pale shade of skin and you just like dance around the fire
Yeah.
wearing face paint and wearing lots of stuff that rattles as you're moving and stuff. It's like for
Yeah.
me, and you know, I welcome anybody to disagree with me, but I'd say like indigeneity and re-indigenization involves like becoming and sustaining a relationship with the earth as a part of her body. You know, so like what I said in the text is like to be indigenous for me means like I'm like earth's skin and hair and fingers and fingernails, claws even. Um, and I don't think that like earth wants me to confine myself dancing around fires with face paint on. And
Oh,
I
sure.
think earth is fine with me wearing regular people clothes and having logical arguments with people who consider themselves to be the gatekeepers of what is logical and fucking destroying them,
Mm.
um, in service of, I would say, like Earth's realignment with the cosmos.
Oh, sure.
Um, so, what this has to do with Hazrat Inayat Khan, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm really grateful for the space to say it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that, like situating us in like time, like points in history where we can kind of like draw these links and like do our own research as well. And then my second point is, yeah, it's okay if we diverge because I feel like, yeah, that's the point of this book club for me is like if the contents bring up more material than us, that I mean for us, then it's I feel like that's the point of a good book club. I like when book clubs diverge. So yeah. I also want to see if Anna wanted to unmute to share what she said in the chat.
Yeah, I feel like what I was saying about re-indigenized science, I mean, it makes sense for me because like the way that you started out, like the point that you started out with was talking about the compartmentalization. And so I think it does make sense to say re-indigenizing science. I see what you're saying. I also don't think that saying that means denying that that connection has always existed personally.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that feels
Like, I
aligned.
feel like it emphasizes it, you know, for me anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think it's important to talk about the egregores around indigenization because it also speaks to like what keeps people from having that relationship as opposed to just being like people forgot. Like the next natural
Yeah,
question, why did people forget? And
right.
it,
And
it
yeah, I also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say it has to do, I think, because like the image of like science and like having like ripened logical discussions has been kind of like curtailed to happen in these experiences or like environments that are like with white coats and like can only be like published if there's like empirical evidence, but it's like what about like what people discover through their like mystical experiences or whenever they like Tiff said, like adopt the like hypothesis style of thinking for their own lives or for like something that they would rather observe um the outcome of. I think it kind of just creates more room for people to experiment and doesn't allow the discovery or like the drive to discover um belong only to like schools of thought that are like science based is kind of like what I feel is like important to name. I don't think that re-indigenizing science takes away from anything, but I think just saying re-indigenizing science without saying the how can kind of like bring in some of these egregores about both science and indigenizing. Tiff, I was wondering if you wanted to unmute and read what you said about the tweet in the chat.
Yes. So I don't remember where the tweet was because that timeline be flying past me. So, but I do remember the gist of it was like people were like going back and forth about like who gets the right to Palestine, and Israel's like we were there first, and Palestine was like we're here now, and basically somebody like chimed in and was like the word indigenous, like being indigenous to a place doesn't just mean you happen to be there first, but it means like the people who are taking care of the land and like cultivating the life there, and like bombing indiscriminately just everything and everybody and all the life and ripping up olive trees for funsies. Like that's not taking care of the land. That's the exact opposite. Like you're kind of ruining the land, like filling it with all kinds of bad chemicals and destroying everything. So it's like that. I never thought about it like that because the word indigenous to me always just meant like who was there before us, who were there now, like in classes and stuff, like the indigenous Americans, that's like the people who were here, but they were taking care of the land. Like somebody might have had came before them, but we talk about the indigenous people and like that's I never really looked at it from that perspective. Like I was kind of picturing the same similar egregores, the variously brown people who just kind of earthy and they don't use a whole too much technology maybe, but I mean, then you think about they have their own technology, and it just happens to be like really, it's not as noticeable as ours because ours is more kind of was it juxtaposed against like nature, and their technology is like made from nature and might blend back into it at some point, and it's all for the purpose of cultivating the land that they're on, which is very scientific if you're trying to like figure out the best way to do that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Tiff, because I feel like it's hard to see indigenizing in the same way when you consider what's happening in the world um right now. So I'm really glad that you said that, because I feel like also the conflict in the Levant is also helping me clarify what indigenize being indigenous to a land means. And I actually do think a lot of people still hold on to the belief that it's um who was there first. And for a long time I subscribed to that. It's like we were the first, we were wolves, like we were there first and we stake a claim to the land. But I also feel like that's so ill representative towards the lineages that have been known to steward the land. And it also like brings up for me then, like, how do you answer to that? Because it's like if you discover a land and you move from it, like you move away from it or you leave it, and this is just like my process, so feel free to just cancel me later, that's fine. But I'm like, and if you move away from that land and another group of people comes in and cultivates it and makes a livelihood and a culture out of it, and they're also not stopping other people from doing that on that same land, then aside from the right of being who, like, because I'm like, who gives them the right to say, or anyone to say that they're not indigenous? But I'm also like taking it a step further, and like positioning myself and saying like, who gives other oppressive forces the right to bomb that land and also strip the earth of that particular space of its resources and strip it of its bioecology for the use of these like man-made weapons. So I'm really glad that you spoke to that too, like how different people are inspired, I think, based on their karma with the land to produce and interact with the land in a particular way. And so if one group of people is driven to like bomb a land and inflict violence on it, I think that speaks to like what the land is trying to teach them. And if another people are drawn to like cultivate the land, grow with the land, create a story with the land, then that speaks to like what kind of conversation, again, if we're kind of in this example as earth as a living being, um it kind of reflects the kind of conversation that they're having with the land, and again, like what karma they're ripening with the land as well. So yeah, we have some etymology in the chat. Nobu says, "Ooh, maybe we need to find a new word." So indigenous, the etymology of indigenous points to, according to Wikipedia, a native born in a country. It's from Indi or Indu, an old derivative of in, with the roots of gigno, which means to give birth to. And there's a couple of comparatives from ancient Greek um, that say endogenous, meaning born in the house. Wow. And the separately formed endogenous, and it's unrelated to the word Indian. So there's also a Old Latin and Proto-Italic and Proto-Indo-European etymology that speaks to indigenous meaning in, inside, or into. And then the ancient Greek etymology takes it further to say that endon means, or it relates to being in or within. Wiktionary. Oh, thank you. Not Wikipedia, Wiktionary. Yeah, so I do feel like a new word, we're due for a new word.
It's so interesting to me where, like, in the first excerpt from Wiktionary, they say unrelated to Indian. And then in the next, like when it's going to sound kind of meta when you go deeper within to the word Indu. It's from like Proto-Indo-European and it means inside into. And, like the word Indian, I think, comes from like the Indus River. And we're talking about like an etymon from Proto-Indo-European. And it makes it feel very difficult for me to justify them saying that it's completely unrelated to the word Indian, especially when we're looking at a text which, comes from an exponent of I would say like Indus River spirituality, as much I would call it.
Right.
And he's talking so much about like the esoteric nature of science, the esoteric nature of music, the esoteric nature of relating as separate beings in the body of like oneness. Um, I love Wiktionary, but you know, I'm just gonna call him out on that. And yeah, I guess I want to going back to like the idea of new words. I feel like so, like Anna said, I also feel like there are probably people from slash in Israel who are stewarding life that are not represented by their government, and maybe more than probably there are.
Yeah.
And like stewarding is sort of one of the words I was thinking of as something that might be a little bit more useful than indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm curious how y'all think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing in the etymology too, because I like how it instantly contradicted itself, but instantly took us to a deeper place. And I really enjoy the word steward personally. I wonder if we can look up the etymology of steward, because I think something about that word, like the spirit of that word, for me, I think speaks to like a more matrilineal um, lens and communal lens of looking at the earth and engaging with the earth. And I think like to be a steward of something, I don't know, the first thing that comes up for me, y'all, I'm gonna just be real. Um, Stewarding, the thing that I bring up for me in my system right now that's coming up as like the not opposite, but I guess the pole to like stewarding and why I like it is like mothering, and how like I don't know, that might be complex, but for me I'm like it's different than mothering, but stewarding has like a different connotation. So I'm gonna read oh, Anna says I feel like steward implies a certain dot 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 verbing. Yeah. So Nobu shared the Wiktionary entry on stewarding. Do you want to read it, Nobu?
Oh yeah. From Middle English, steward, steward. From Old English, blah 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 blah. One of the words that comes up here is like steward, housekeeper, one who has the superintendence. Now that's a really interesting one. Superintendence of household affairs, and then guardian. And apparently it comes from the word stig, which means like a wooden enclosure or a house, and then ward, which also comes from the word guard as guardian, keeper. And then yeah, Tiff kind of highlighted the words guardian and keeper, and I was like, I love that because I mean it's really funny how close it is to the word gardener as well. Um, and you know, some people who are commonly thought of as indigenous are also commonly referred to as like the gardeners, right? So I think it's more or less common knowledge and accepted knowledge, but um, yeah, like the Amazon forest and the Amazon River isn't just as verdant as it is because it was left alone, but the people who lived there for a long time were like literally, I think maybe even in their own languages, like gardening it. Um, and yeah, I kind of like the idea of sort of detaching the ward part of steward from like stig because, like, you know, like some places it's going to make sense to live in a wooden enclosure, some places it's not going to.
Mhm.
Sometimes it might not even be like, you know, suitable to live in a house, but I think just being like a guardian or a ward or a warden of the
Mhm.
earth as a house, I guess. An earth guardian, I don't know, an earth keeper feels pretty like heartfelt to me.
Mhm. Ashe. Ashe. For some reason, what I'm thinking of is I actually don't know where this phrase comes from, but I'm thinking about the phrase that was said to me. Well, the first time I heard it was in this presentation by an esoteric teacher named Seven Bomar. And in this particular teaching, he was saying or quoting a verse from some religious text that says, "In my Father's house, there are many mansions," without bringing the Father egregore in here. I just was thinking about the idea that that's the Bible. Thank you, Tiff. Thank you. I was like, I don't want to be wrong about this. But yeah, it's the Bible. And yeah, for some reason that came up in terms of what you were saying regarding Stig and how like there's different ways to live as a steward of the earth or guardian of the earth or keeper of the earth. But yeah, I'm holding space. I wonder what else comes up for y'all regarding guardians and keepers, because I really relate to it too. I think there's something really centered about that. There's also something I don't know, in guardian and keeper, it's like it's also like that type of word bears a lot of responsibility too. But I don't know, it doesn't feel like burdensome either for me personally. So yeah.
Um, I feel like like I'm still thinking about the connection to the word indigenous there. And like, if I'm born in a place and like I'm living there for long enough, I kind of want it to be, you know, a place that can still be lived in as my life continues. So I might like maybe thinking about like reflecting on like my house that I wasn't born here, but I grew up here. And like now that I'm getting older and I'm like looking around like, oh, this stuff needs repairs. We should wonder when dad's gonna call the repairman. And I'm like, nah, I'm the grown up now. I'm probably should thinking about how to take care of this house so it remains intact. Like if so it don't fall apart on me. Maybe I'll get rid of it, sell it. Maybe I'll live here forever. I don't know. But like it's gotta still be here while I'm here. That would be nice. And so yeah, like stewardship, like, guardian of the house, like it's it's like a responsibility like you would pick up as
Actually,
like to care about your surroundings in that way.
absolutely, Tiff. And I feel like in some families that's like a rite of passage a little bit, you know? Whereas like just to kind of bring it to the ground level, like once the children start or the youngers start facilitating the things that it takes to uphold a household, then to me it feels like there's like a sort of torch being passed. And I feel like I had a very similar experience too. Um, and then I do want to get to what Nobu was saying about the Zen idea. I guess, yeah. Nobu, do you want to say more about the Zen idea of householding? And I'll save my point for after that.
Yeah, I mean, like the idea, I think, is pretty popular I'll say like different Buddhist canons, and I think that it's a little bit like gender biased in many of those canons. But I think the reason I kind of refer to it as a Zen idea is because it was popularized as like a valid path towards, let's say, like enlightenment or spiritual progress by yeah, like I would say like Zen monk. Um, but yeah, I guess it came up just because of what Tiff was saying about like, yeah, like even if you're not born in a house, there is still this sense of like wanting to respect that space.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if we think of Earth as our house, which I think is quite a lovely way to think about it, I can imagine that frame being really generative.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's funny because I'm like, the example that I was gonna share was like totally outside the gender norms that we assume. Where I was having a talk with my dad a couple years ago when I graduated college, and he was giving me the big like his version of like "you're an adult now" speech, and a lot of the examples in this context. Oh, sick! I just saw somebody like a car drive past with panther eyes on it. That's pretty sick. Um, But the example that I was thinking of between me and my dad, he was kind of giving me that speech of like one day you'll have your own house, and like one day in that house there will be X, Y, and Z. And now like you're equipped, even though you are a woman, to like run a household. And I was like, dang, bruh. And he was also sharing with me, and I'll share this with y'all, that he kind of like my dad's definitely a mystic, and he was sharing with me that he had a dream like before I graduated college about this moment that we were having when I did graduate college. And it was just kind of him doing that, like passing on the torch, even though traditionally in a lot of cultures they do that from like father to son or like mother to daughter. I was kind of appreciative that like my dad took on that role to like tell me that and like transmit that to me, because I do feel like he could probably also see that I'm on a path of spiritual progress. So that felt important for him to like name that, like, we're far from the land that he was born in. We're also far from the culture that he was born in. However, those ethics of stewarding and caring for a place that raised me and cared for me are still important where we are now, which is the States. So yeah, I'm really glad that we're kind of talking about this. So Nova shared some screenshots about who is a householder. In this screenshot, it says, in the traditional Indian society, as householder, Sanskrit grastin is typically a settled adult male with a family. In the Pali canon, various Pali words have been translated into the English word of householder, including agarika, gahapati, gahati, and grihin. Vocations most often associated with householders in the Pali Canon are those of guild foreman, banker, and merchant. But other vocations are mentioned, such as farmer and carpenter. And in the Vajrayana perspective, the Vajrayana tradition has produced many prominent householders, including a couple of people being named here. The Nagapa is an ordained tantric practitioner, sometimes a householder, with certain vows dependent upon lama and lineage that makes them the householder equivalent of a monk or a nun. The path of the Nagapa is a rigorous discipline whereby one quote enjoys the sense fields as a part of one's practice. A practitioner utilizes the whole of the phenomenal world as one path. Marrying, raising children, working jobs, leisure, art, play, etc. are all means to realize the enlightened state, or rigpa, non-dual awareness. As such, we can see the prominence of householders in the Vajrayana tradition. One can, however, be a householder without taking the vows of Nigpa, simply holding the 5 precepts, bodhisattva vows, and the tantric vows while practicing diligently can result in enlightenment. Wow. Wow. I guess I'm just sitting with the felt sense of there being vows and lineages that have already kind of figured this out for us. We're not reinventing the wheel. Nobu says my channel is alive. Ashay. And I see Tiff and Anna are typing.
I stopped typing because it was going to take too long. But I wanted to say that it kind of reminds me of like the idea of Sufism, like being able to connect to the divine through like any phase of life, and how like it's not as rigidly like all the various rules and stuff that people come up with Like it's not enforced as hard. Like you can find it wherever you are if you remember to.
Mhm.
And so it's cool to see it cross like there's like other cultures that have a similar idea of it. Like that just makes it feel more true to me.
Absolutely, Tiff. Yeah, same for me. Like something deep inside of me was affirmed as I was reading that. And I also I've heard from my parents that the most spiritual thing that they've ever done is be parents and have a family and have a household and steward that household in a generative direction. And my mom, she always says it, and I'll say it in her accent only because I love her. She'd be like, being a parent is not easy. It is not easy. And so it's yeah. um, I also just kind of think about the fact that for me personally, the idea and the pursuit of family and a household. I was actually talking to a friend about this yesterday, and I was sharing that I think that's part of my personal calling. Um, and so it very much aligns with these Sufi, Zen, and Vajrayana lineages that I feel pretty familiar with. But it's also very affirming to kind of see it being laid out. Um, and I'm like, what does this have to do with the art of music and science? But I'm like, I think this is more about a way of life, which is also important to me. Um, but yeah.
I guess what I'm reflecting upon, going back to, well, I guess I'll say looking, first of all, looking on all of these definitions of what a household is and what are the ways that householders should behave. Um, I feel like there's this almost kind of tragicomic aspect of it for me where they were trying so hard to dictate what these these roles and these duties are, perhaps in a way so that they could say oh, you can pursue a spiritual path even if you're doing what normal people do or whatever. But then I feel like their words ended up calcifying and creating these rigid definitions of what people need to do, which when we get to current time seem restrictive, right? The idea that you're male and the owner of land. I mean, that's pretty restrictive for females, quite clearly, but it's also restrictive for a lot of men because it's really hard to own land nowadays, because of BlackRock and shit. But
Right.
but then those things get kind of taken out of time, and we kind of have to update them. And yeah, I think I also admire that Sufi, but also in general the esoteric perspective, which is that yes, you can put out words which make it clear that even if you aren't what people think spirituality is, you can be these other things if you do these things and be spiritual. But then I would say esoteric traditions, apophatic traditions are more they're more interested generally in saying what isn't true
Mm.
in order to create space for what is, so to say you don't have to be a monk to be a spiritual person. Earnestly pursuing a spiritual path opens up so much space versus saying you can be living at X, Y, and Z Douglas Street in this place with genitals, and then you can be spiritual. And I think to bring it back a little bit to the text that we're is kind of the nominal focus of this container is I think that, okay, one of the things that he says in the first paragraph is that Sanskrit is perhaps the original language, and you have to study Indian music to understand the connection between spirituality and music. And I kind of think that's really chauvinistic, but I feel the bulk of what he says in this text is very relatable to everybody, right? Okay, maybe not everybody can experience music, say people who have difficulty hearing, or even have difficulty, let's say, um getting access to Spotify or whatever. But I think he also talks about sound and music in a sense, which is so esoteric that like pretty much anybody who senses anything, like anybody who is aware of some form of phenomena, is perhaps able to connect it to sound and to music and to harmony and to yeah, I think like what we were saying earlier about like relationality. Um, hmm. And then I kind of said a lot, but I guess the last thing I want to say is also just like when meditating upon like this topic of indigeneity, I think one of the reasons like perhaps people gravitate towards using labels like that is because it's like
Mhm.
relatively easy to define who is indigenous and who's not. And I think this kind of like relates to what I was saying before. Like it's relatively easy to say like a household is X, Y, and Z. And you know, for a lot of people, it's hard for them to understand when you say like you don't have to be a monk to be spiritual. People are
Right.
like, well, tell me what I can be. You
Right.
know, I want you to tell me what I can be. And you know, like that's not how my ancestors, that's not how I work, but I think a lot of people work that way. But yeah, you know, like indigeneity, like, okay, can we figure out that, you know, somebody in your family tree was not from England or like was not from, you know, from like some kind of colonial expedition? Like that's relatively easy. I think it's really hard for people to say like what does it mean to be a steward of the land? Like, you know, is it like you need to have a compost bin, or like what happens if you don't live in a place where they have like compost services? Like then you have to make it, you know what I'm saying? Is composting even like net the most effective way to do things? Or like what if you are somebody who's working towards becoming like a kick-ass energy worker, but you live in a place where you have to drive a car? Does that mean you're not a steward, even if the work that you're doing is designed to help people to connect to the earth so that they can like gradually re-indigenize themselves, you know? So I think it's really difficult. Um, and to an extent, like if we're talking about like legalistic manifestations of this practice, it's very hard to define like who is a steward and who is not, you know, who's a guardian of the earth and who is not. Um, so I understand why people talk about indigeneity, but I also feel like it's worth like challenging that notion a little.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I agree with so much of what you said, because I think that there is in current time a search that a lot of people are on to figure out how to situate themselves as either stewards of the earth, or like people who just know that shit is wonky right now and they just kind of want to like protect themselves, which is understandable. Um and I kind of feel similar with like some of my lineages, where it's like I don't know if there's a way to tell any one person what you should be doing, because I feel like that's such an encroachment on not only one's free will but also like one's creative potentiality. But I also do think that like creating openings, especially as an energy worker, like creating openings for people to find ways to do that that align with their lineages and also align with the earth is more par for the course. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a layout where everyone has like a perfect role and everyone is like, you know, in this large like compound of human like unity. And maybe it will in like a couple of lifetimes. I'm not sure, like a couple of centuries, but I also am like, yeah, I feel like it's worth challenging the definitions that we have of what it means to be indigenous. And maybe also challenging our ideals around stewardship as well, and the way that we're positioned to kind of like envision that relationship with the earth. So thank you for saying that. Tiff says, I think there are always ways to be a steward of music. Oh yeah, do you want to say more about that, Tiff, or connect us back to music in general?
Yeah. So I think, you know, we kind of in our world connect to music differently than I guess the the way it was meant to be, perhaps sometimes, or like thinking about like being a musician or like an instrument player or something. Like a lot of times, when you're taking a lesson or something, they start you with the basics, and like maybe you wanted to start playing because you connected to like that instrument, you heard somebody play it and it made you feel a certain way, and like it takes so long before you get to that feeling again. Like once you start playing, you're just like, oh, my fingers hurt, oh, I'm tired of playing this scale over and over and over. And then you get good at those things, and you're like, oh, guess how fast I can play this scale. Look at these cool chords I can hit. And then it's like still like the connection isn't there, and it took me a while to get to that point, to like come back around full circle. And I think like stewarding music, or like like the way the technology is, where you could just punch in some computer keys and have a song, and like AI is making it now. But still, like the original soul of music is there. And like I think a lot of musicians are like, the ones I know, they're trying to cultivate that in people. And like when you become a teacher or something, like you try to keep the youth interested in what music can do for you, in like a like connections sort of way, and not just like, oh yeah, if you can count these beats, you'll be good in math class or whatever. Like they try to like push the arts up as a back to the STEM department
Yeah.
somehow. And it's like it can be important on its own. And like there were like, the original schools, they taught music as part of the sciences, because it's like it's its own thing. Like, so I guess like stewarding music in that sense of like trying to connect to it deeper on your own and foster that connection in others. And like there's different ways to do that, I think.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, stewarding music, stewarding the earth, like I mean, the earth has its own frequencies and music going on. So like being able to tap into that behind the senses vibe of music is, it definitely transfers to feel the behind the senses vibes of what's going on in the earth. Like, and I think each like Noble was saying, like maybe you don't have a compost bin, so you can't just do like stop stuff in landfills. That's but maybe you got something else going on where you're helping other people reconnect themselves to the earth, and maybe like that'll help change the wide scene, each one teach one of some sort. I don't know, it's possible, but I don't know how.
I'm almost wondering, because as you were speaking, Tiff, I wonder, for me, in my mind, I was like making a connection between stewarding and the word composing. And I wonder how that, because I'm like, I wonder if that's another aspect to this. Like, you might not be the person that's like creating a compost bin and like going around your neighborhood, letting other people know that like it's important to like grow their own vegetables, and like maybe you're not like giving away chickens so that people can start, like caring for their own chickens and also like make their own eggs, and then like, um, but then I'm also like, there's this like composing nature, I think, that I'm like connecting music, like the idea of like composing music and like how to keep that intuitive faculty, like that muscle worked out in music can like transfer, like that's kind of like something that can transfer over to like earth stewardship, and how like maybe you're like part of a community of other people who live in other parts of the world, and like y'all are discussing and like figuring out ways to let's say, for lack of better words, re-indigenize oneself in terms of your connection with the earth. And that's like a part of like a larger um orchestra, I would say, that like maybe it's not happening all in one singular like flat line, like a domino effect, but how there is this like kind of, in what you said, I feel encouraged to kind of think of earth stewardship as also like composing music in a way. So I'm curious if that brings up anything for y'all. It was that haha composing, composting, and decomposing. Tip says improvisation, coming up with your own ways to affect change. That's jazz. That's hip hop. I agree. And I also wonder too, like I guess another thing that's coming up for me too is like if there's a way that like people without access to like Spotify or like YouTube music can access the realm of phenomenology of sound and like that universe, then I think there's a way for like the average person who's like living in suburbia America to access the phenomenology of Earth and like approach that relationship from yeah, kind of like what you were saying, Nobu, like an esoteric lens. Um and I don't know, I just feel like for me, like I'm seeing it through like my own struggles with trying to figure out like how to be good to the earth, how to be good to people. Well, not good to, but like to be an effective steward of the earth, be an effective steward of the different communities that I'm in, and then also be an effective steward of like my own behavior. And I'm just coming back to like, we didn't get far in this text, but that first paragraph I think says a lot, where I don't want to say it all collapses back into intuition, but I wonder if like refining one's intuition is part of this like ask. Not everybody can get up and go to India to figure out what is in the esoteric lineages. I don't think everybody can get up and like, yeah, like we talked about, like start a compost bin, but there is something that people can do. And I think if they're tuned into their intuition, yeah, I feel like something can be born from that personally. I hope.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like the intuition is important in any aspect of like improvisation in general. Like you do an improv for like comedy or for music or just like trying to come up with a new idea when like maybe you live in a concrete jungle and there's no indigenous or stewardship of the earth available because there's no earth available because it's all paved over. But
Mm,
like you can just like that's when you go within and just sort of if you got the good intuition you can figure that out like something to do that
mhm.
might seem real out of pocket and out of place for the area but the idea comes to you and if you're willing to like dig deeper into it and follow the thread or
Yeah.
whatever you might come upon something or you might be inspired to go somewhere else where there's or put some little flowers in your windowsill. I don't know,
Yeah.
something.
If that was the image in my mind's eye, I'm like, so many people I know who live in concrete jungles have like a window herb garden where it's like they're growing like 3 to 4 herbs, and like that process of growing those 3 to 4 herbs teaches them like a lot, like a lot. And I'm like, I wonder also too if like there's a little bit of like projection on like what the earth at its most like harmonic state is supposed to look like, because I'm like, what if it is just like 9 billion people making small incremental changes so that later on like their offspring or the youngers that other people give birth to down the line know that it's important, like, hey, even if you're growing in like concrete jungle and you yourself, that's the environment that's growing you, earth is also willing to like invite itself into that collaboration. And like, I don't know, I'm getting so many like ripples in my field that I wonder how y'all feel about that, or what that brings up for y'all. Yes, it's like little things, and like Tiff said, and now you got seasoning with less disposable plastics. Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like every time I get sent to the store to buy like a bag of onions or like potatoes or something, I'm
Mm.
like, yo, I could just like leave one of these until they start sprouting and then throw it in the backyard and see what happens.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna wait till a little later because I'm not the yard person right now. So like if if dad's out cutting the grass and there's hella sprouts of garlic and stuff in his way, he might not be too happy about that. But like that was like my thought of like, I wonder how I can steward the earth as I'm living in this. Like, I got a little patch of land in the back, small patch. We can do something with it. We're not really stewarding. Like, we buy flowers and they die, and then we buy more flowers and plant them, and then they die. And I'm like, what? This like new land. It's got sand underneath the grass, and like, how do you turn all of this into dirt? How do you
Yeah.
like pour more dirt? But like we could cultivate it somehow. And I was like thinking like that, like just coming up with stuff, and like it's in my back pocket when I'm ready to try it. Just
Yeah.
little things here and there.
Yeah. I feel like that's big. Like that's something that my family talks about too. Like we have these like large discussions about like when we buy our first property like in the States, that like I'm gonna be the person responsible for like planting stuff. And like of course my mom and like everyone else has their input. They're like, don't grow this and then grow this and then like don't grow this, but like make sure. And I'm like, okay, but like either way, like I've always gotten that nudge to like start a small garden for my family so that they're not really outdoorsy people. I I personally can say with confidence that I don't know if my family's interested in stewarding the earth, like, but it's like they might not necessarily be interested in stewarding, but that also doesn't mean that they don't have appointments with the earth to like understand like this like ecological language that, like we were talking earlier, like how the earth has a blueprint for being in right relationship and also having exponentially better energetic exchanges that possibly can come from somebody like growing a little like basil, having like a basil patch. And so to me, yeah, I'm like there are so many ways, and I also feel like there's like people think it's a big leap, maybe, I'm not sure, but I also feel like there are little things that people can do every single day that make that difference personally, in my opinion. I'm actually kind of feeling hopeful now that we talked about it. I'm like, yeah, like re-indigenizing oneself. I don't know if it has to be like all that. Yeah, yeah, like it has to be. Like I don't think it has to be violent. I don't think it has to mean like stripping yourself of what you enjoy. It's kind of like what Nobu said. Like I don't think that the earth wants me to be like naked from the waist up with face paint on, being like, ooh, because I'm like, I think my ancestors already did that. Like they already paved that pathway. They've already like kind of gotten real close and chummy with the earth. That I feels like the challenge for this current time is like, and how do you do that with the environment that you're in now? I think you can move. I think people can move to lands where like there's cooperatives, which is like on the like larger leap side of the spectrum of leaps to make. But then I also think that there's like small things where people can switch um what they bring to the grocery store to store their groceries. Like they can bring their own bag. People can use glass bottles instead of plastic. And yeah, I also feel like the nudge to change, um, and the nudge, like wherever people are, like even if you're listening to this asynchronously and you're like, how do I kind of re-engage with the earth? I think if you meditate, and I think if you really look within, and I think if you cultivate a practice of looking within, the answer to that question is a little easier, or it might be a little bit easier to access than it would be just being exposed to like the way that the world is. Um, so yeah, this is very hopeful. Hazrat and Yakana, I hope so wherever you are in the ethers that you know that chapter 12 brought us to a very inspirational place, at least for me personally. Um, but yeah, I'm curious, yeah, how y'all are feeling. or what y'all
I
might
mean,
be.
I loved what you said about going within, and it kind of got me thinking. It's like, yeah, I'd be really curious, right? Like if you took like a population that was sort of interested in like re-indigenizing, and then like half of them, you're just like, okay, yeah, like go follow all the advice that you see on Instagram or whatever. And then half of them, you're just like, okay, don't not follow what you see on Instagram, but just like meditate for 15 minutes,
Yeah.
let's say, with some intention to connect your root chakra to the center of the earth, and then just like write down what happens and then pursue it. I'd be really interested to see what would happen after like 1 year, like what kind of like habit change would
Mm.
occur. I would put bets on it because I'm a betting person nowadays. But you know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe people would slip up, but I think that is the spiritual path. It's not slipping up so much, but like it is like a winding, wandering path.
Hmm.
But I think like what makes it a spiritual path in some sense is like some form of like intention or consistency. And yeah, I think what you mentioned about going within is super important too.
Yeah, agreed. I almost like, okay, Tiff said she wants to kind of try it for herself for science. And I'm like, I kind of feel inspired to do that too. And also like want to invite anybody who's listening to this playback to try something like that, you know? It's like give yourself 15 minutes before you make these decisions. Or I was even thinking like how sometimes before I go on errands to like get what I need for my house, how I like do that. Like I'll sit in my car and meditate for a little bit because I'm like, okay, I want to be able to focus on what I need. I also want to be able to focus on what I didn't know I needed that might come up in my awareness, whether I'm at the store or I'm going to the farmer's market or whatever. And actually would be really interested to know like what happens both for me and for other people if they did that, not only just before they spent their dollar but before, you go on the hunts. Like, a lot of people when they're on social media, they're hunting for like ways of life, and they're hunting for like information, and they're hunting for suggestions on what they can do to either progress if they're on a spiritual path, or if they're just making lifestyle changes, which I'll say are inspired by spirit, but they might not say that. But I'm like, I wonder what would happen for people if they did that 15 minutes before they made any like lifestyle changing decisions and what they came back with. And I also like what you said too, Nobu, specifically pointing to the earth chakra, or no, sorry, the root chakra. I don't know what's wrong with me today, but the root chakra I feel like is so key to, I think, actually being able to discern what it is you need or what it is you think you need, or what type of space you want to take up in any given environment, or what space you want to leave available in any given environment. And so thank you. I'm really grateful you spoke to that. Well, guys, this was an amazing conversation. I'll hold a little bit more space to see if you guys have any other reflections.
I mean, I think I have like a meta hazrat inayat Khan reflection.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to read out a little part of chapter 12. Um, I'll say, when one hears an artist, a singer of Hindu music, the first thing he does, fucking pronouns, is to tune their tempura to give one chord, and while they tune their tempura, they tune their own soul. This is such an influence on their hearers that they can wait patiently for 15 minutes. Once they find that they are in tune with their instrument, with that note, their soul, mind, and body all seem to be one with the instrument. A person with a sensitive heart listens to their song, even a foreigner listening to their song will perceive the way the artist sings into that chord, the way they tune their spirit to that chord. By that time, they have concentrated. By that time, they have attuned themselves to all who are there. Not only have they tuned the instrument, but they have felt the need of every soul in the audience and the demands of their souls, what they want at that time. Perhaps not every musician can do this, but the best can. Then they then they synthesize, and it all comes automatically. And I guess I just wanted to hold that up kind of in a cheeky and also meta way because yeah, I'd say we had a pretty inspirational and heartfelt conversation about indigenization and science and about stewarding the earth. And on the surface, I feel like it probably had very little to do with the text, even though the text was our departure point. But I feel like in the spirit of musicianship that Hazrat Inayat Khan, I believe Hazrat Inayat Khan was talking about, I believe we had the conversation that we needed to have right now.
Ashe.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Nobu. That was one of the passages I forgot to read out, but that was the main idea of being a steward. I think to me, you tune your soul, it's tunable. So whatever you're trying to be a steward of, everything you do kind of has to be in line with that. And the best way to just subconsciously get alignment, and just if you get your soul together first, then you can, if you get up, you do I'm gonna get on stage, I'm gonna play this music. I know that I practice, but this live show right here, I feel the vibe in the room. I feel my soul is the vibe, and we connecting, and they here to listen. So I'm here to, send a message. I don't know what the message is, but if I get my soul tuned right, it could just be the generic message of love or something. And then every note I play is going to have that feeling to it, because that's what I'm focused on. That's what I tune my soul to. So you want to be I'm going out to the store, and I need to, get things for the house, and I have a list, but I might have forgot something on the list. If your soul is attuned to it, you're gonna see something on the shelf, oh yeah, I'm gonna get that too. And if you're not paying attention, if you just breezing through the store, I gotta go to this section to get this thing on the list, and this section to get this thing on the list, and you walk past something that you were also supposed to add to the list, but you didn't, you might miss it. But if your soul's kind of tuned and aligned, you might, it'll connect to you, and you'll the attention and the focus comes into play.
Ashe. Wow. I love it. How the end of this container reflects what we've been talking about this whole container. And I feel yeah, we may have departed from the text, but our souls were tuned. And it makes me think of transmission style, which a transmission style, collaborations or interactions, and how you might not know what comes out, but if your soul is tuned to it, if you gave yourself that 15 minutes to tune yourself, to tune your instrument, your body, then you might not be off. And if you are a little off, there's always the next day, I feel. And I love how the text brings up 15 minutes. it's like we were reading it without reading it. Tiff says, or back to parenting, you just know when the baby needs something. Yeah, man. I feel like what I'm walking away with from this discussion is intuition being a part of our everyday lives, which at first I was going to say discernment being part of our everyday lives, but I'm I think that intuition is what I'm pointing to, and fits better for the example that I'm making right now. And I wonder, any parting words from y'all about maybe what you will be reflecting on or what you've taken away from this discussion? hold a little bit more space for that. Ashe. Nobu says, I feel great. Thank you. Soul tuned. My crown going off a bit. Thank you for reflecting. Ashe. And Tiff says, this container was a reminder to keep tuning my soul. Ashe. All right, y'all. Thank y'all so much for being here. And thank you all for listening asynchronously. Tune in next week, next Saturday at 11 a.m. for the next chapter. I don't want to say the chapter number because I think we'll be jumping around. So stay tuned and thank you all again. And thank you, Craig.